The rain had been falling for 2 hours when Daniel saw her. A woman sitting alone at the edge of an abandoned bus stop, soaked through arms wrapped around herself, like that could hold something together. He almost kept driving. He had a son at home, and a long shift behind him, and strangers on dark roads were never simple. But he stopped anyway. He gave her a warm meal, a dry blanket, and the couch for the night. One night. That was all. Then she looked at the old family photo on the wall and said, "I know what happened to your wife." The town of Crestfield, Oregon did not ask much of the people who lived in it. It had one main road, 2 diners, a hardware store, and the kind of quiet that settled over everything by 8 in the evening. For most people, that quiet was the point. For Daniel Carter, it had become something he simply moved through without thinking about it, the way you stop noticing a sound that never changes. He had lived there his whole life. He ran a 1-bay garage off Route 9, did honest work, at honest rates, and was home in time to make dinner for his son most nights. That was the shape of his days, and he had built it carefully, the way a person builds something when they know that the wrong move will cost them more than they can afford to lose. His wife Rachel had died 4 years earlier. The official report said she lost control of her vehicle on a wet stretch of highway 12 miles outside of town. The road had no guardrail. The drop was steep. The conclusion was filed as accidental, and the case was closed within 6 weeks. Daniel had never fully believed it. He had no evidence, no alternative theory, nothing he could point to and say, "Here, this is wrong." He just knew Rachel. He knew how she drove. He knew she had been distracted in the weeks before she died. Not the distracted of someone overwhelmed, but the distracted of someone paying close attention to something she had not told him about yet. He had told himself he would ask her about it when the time felt right. He had run out of time. So he had done what people do. He had stayed. He had raised Ethan. He had kept the garage open and paid the bills and attended the school events and done everything that needed doing. And he had left the question sitting in the back of his mind like a stone he had learned to walk around. Ethan was 9 years old and had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness in roughly equal measure. He was the kind of child who asked questions with complete seriousness and expected complete answers, which meant that conversations about Rachel had always required more of Daniel than he was prepared to give. On the evening Daniel met Emily, Ethan had been sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework while Daniel cleaned up after dinner. Out of nowhere, without looking up from his worksheet, Ethan said, "Dad, do you think Mom knows when you're thinking about her?" Daniel set down the dish he was drying. He stood there for a moment, trying to locate an answer that was honest and also survivable. He said, "I don't know, Bud." Ethan considered this with the gravity of someone filing it under unsatisfactory but acceptable, and went back to his worksheet. Daniel finished the dishes. He told Ethan he had a late call at the garage, a customer whose truck had broken down 2 towns over and needed a tow. He got Ethan settled for the night, locked the front door, and drove out into the rain. The tow job was straightforward. It was on the way back just past 11 that he saw the woman at the bus stop. She was sitting on the concrete bench with her arms pulled tight across her chest, wearing a jacket that had stopped being waterproof some time ago. There was no bag beside her, no phone in her hand. She did not look up when his headlights swept across her. She just sat there in the rain, with the stillness of someone who had stopped expecting anything to change. Daniel pulled over. He rolled down the window and asked if she was all right. She looked at him with the careful assessment of someone who had learned not to trust quickly, and said she was fine. She did not look fine. He asked if she had a way to get where she was going. She said her phone was dead, and the last bus had been 3 hours ago. He asked where she was headed. She said she was not entirely sure. He told her he had a couch and a dry house 10 minutes away, and that she was welcome to both if she needed them. She looked at him for a long moment, reading him. He realized the way someone reads a situation when they have had reasons to be careful. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. Her name was Emily Harper. She said it on the drive back along with nothing else, and Daniel did not press. He had learned that people who were ready to talk would talk, and people who were not would not, and pushing the difference only made things worse. He made her tea while she changed into dry clothes he found from a box Rachel had left in the spare room. He set out bread and leftover soup, and she ate with the efficiency of someone who had not eaten in a while, but did not want to draw attention to it. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and the rain came down outside, and the house was quiet. Then footsteps came down the stairs. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, blinking at the light with the mild accusation of a child woken by adult noise. He looked at Emily. He looked at Daniel. Then his gaze drifted the way a child's gaze drifts to the family photo on the wall, the one from the county fair. 3 summers before Rachel died. Rachel laughing with Ethan on her shoulders, Daniel beside her, with his hand at her back. Ethan looked at the photo, then back at Emily with the uncomplicated directness of someone who had not yet learned to pretend he had not noticed things. "Were you friends with my mom?" he asked. The kitchen went very still. Emily looked at the photo. Something moved across her face, not surprise, but recognition, the kind that comes from seeing something you already knew was there. She looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Daniel told Ethan gently that it was past midnight and he needed to go back to bed. Ethan, reading the room with the accuracy children sometimes have said, "'Kay," and went upstairs without arguing. His footsteps crossed the ceiling and then went quiet. Daniel turned back to Emily. She was still looking at the photo. Then she said, "I know what happened to your wife." He did not speak. He stood at the edge of the kitchen and waited, because something in her voice told him that what came next required him to be still. Emily set down her mug. She said that 4 years ago she had been an insurance investigator assigned to process the claim on Rachel's accident. Standard procedure vehicle damage, assessment, liability, review, cross-check against the police report. She had done it dozens of times. This one was different. The inconsistencies were small individually. The damage pattern on the vehicle did not fully match what a single-point impact on that grade of slope would produce. A witness statement in the police file referenced another vehicle on the road that night, but the statement was 1 paragraph long, and there was no follow-up documentation. A routine brake inspection was listed as completed, but the inspector's name was illegible, and the certification number did not match any registered technician in the county database. She had flagged all of it. Her supervisor had reviewed her notes and told her the file was within acceptable parameters and to close it. She had said she wasn't comfortable doing that. A week later, she had been called into a meeting and informed that her position was being eliminated due to a departmental restructuring. She had spent the years since then continuing on her own. Not as an investigator, she had no authority. Left. No institutional access. No resources. Just as someone who could not let it go. She had followed the threads she had started and found others she had not been looking for. She had come to Crestfield because this was where those threads ended. She was not here by accident. She had chosen to come here. She had been working toward this specific conversation for a very long time. Daniel listened to all of it without moving. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet again, except for the rain. He thought about what it would mean to send her away to thank her for telling him, and show her to the door, and go back to the shape of his days, the garage and the school pickups, and the stone he walked around each morning. He thought about Ethan upstairs asleep asking questions that did not have clean answers. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He said, "Tell me everything." The next morning came gray and quiet. Emily sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee Daniel had made without asking, and she laid out what she knew, the way someone does when they have been carrying it, too long carefully, like the weight of it might still break something if set down too fast. Rachel, she explained, had been looking into a local construction company called Hargrove and Sons, not because it was her job, because she had noticed something. A city contract awarded at nearly double the standard rate. A road project that took 3 times as long as it should have. Small things, the kind most people walk past. Rachel had not walked past them. Daniel listened without speaking. He kept his hands flat on the table, as if stillness would help him absorb it. Emily told him Rachel had spent months collecting documents, invoices, bid records, internal memos she had managed to obtain through sources she never identified. She was building a case quietly on her own time, telling no one, not even Daniel. That last part landed the hardest. Not the corruption, not the timeline, but the fact that Rachel had been carrying all of it alone in the same house where they ate dinner together every night, and he had not known. He thought back to those last weeks before she died, the late nights at the desk after Ethan was asleep, the phone calls she took in the backyard, the way she sometimes looked at him over breakfast like she wanted to say something and then decided not to. He had told himself she was tired. He had told himself it was nothing. That afternoon, Daniel drove to the sheriff's station. He told himself he was just asking questions. Old questions, the kind that had never been fully answered, the exact angle of impact, the condition of the road, whether anyone had checked the brake lines. He had asked these things once before, years ago, and been told the investigation was thorough, and the conclusion was clear. He had accepted that. He was not sure why. Sheriff Mark Dalton was at his desk when Daniel walked in. The man was in his late 50s, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had once been open and had since closed. He looked up when Daniel entered, and something behind his eyes shifted. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition of something he had been expecting. Daniel asked about the accident report. He kept his voice level. He said he had been thinking about some of the details and wanted to go over them again. Dalton did not move from his chair. He looked at Daniel for a long moment, then said, "That case is closed, Daniel. Has been for years. You know that." Daniel said he just had a few questions. Dalton said there was nothing left to answer. His voice was not unkind, but it was final in the way a door being locked is final. Not aggressive, just shut. He told Daniel to go home, take care of his son, and leave the past where it was. Then he went back to the papers on his desk, as if Daniel had already left. Daniel stood there a moment longer watching him. Then he turned and walked out. The drive home felt longer than it should have. He told Emily what happened. She was not surprised. She said that when she had been investigating the claim, she had requested the full accident report through official channels and been told there were processing delays. She had followed up 3 times. The report had eventually arrived, but 2 pages were missing, the ones covering the physical inspection of Rachel's vehicle. When she flagged it, her supervisor told her the file was complete and the claim was being closed. That was the week before she was let go. They started looking for whatever Rachel might have left behind. Daniel went through the closet in the spare room where Rachel had kept her work materials. Most of it was gone. He had cleared it out in the first year after she died. Not because he wanted to, but because leaving it untouched had felt like waiting for something that was never coming back. What remained was a cardboard box with old notebooks, a broken tape measure, and a folder of receipts. Nothing that looked like what Emily had described. Emily had her laptop open on the kitchen table, pulling at threads from the outside. She had kept copies of her own notes from the original investigation, saved on an encrypted drive she carried with her. She cross-referenced names from the Hargrove and Sons board with local government records. 2 of them had served on the County Planning Commission during the period Rachel had been looking into. One had since moved to a position in the State Infrastructure Office. The money had followed the right people to the right places for a long time. Then the other thing started. A dark sedan Daniel did not recognize began appearing on his street. It was there in the morning when he left for work and gone by the time he came home, then back again the next day. He told himself it could be anyone. He told himself that twice. The phone rang one night after Ethan was in bed. Daniel answered and heard nothing. Not static, not breathing, just open silence on the line before it went dead. He stood in the kitchen holding the phone for a while after that. Then Ethan came home from school and mentioned with the unconcerned ease of a 9-year-old that there had been a man outside the school fence that afternoon. Just standing there, Ethan said. Watching. He had not seemed scary, Ethan added helpfully, because he was wearing a normal jacket. Daniel set down the dish he was washing and asked Ethan to describe the man. Ethan described someone unremarkable, medium height, older, dark coat. It could have been anyone. Could have been no one. But Daniel's hands were not steady when he finished the dishes, and that night he checked every lock in the house twice before he went to bed. Dalton found him 2 days later, not at the station at the garage just before closing. He pulled into the lot in his personal truck, not the department vehicle, and waited until Daniel's last customer had gone. Then he got out and walked over without hurry, the way a man walks when he wants to appear relaxed and is not quite managing it. He told Daniel he knew what he was doing. He said it without accusation, just as a fact. Then he said something Daniel had not expected. "I'm trying to protect you. I know you don't believe that, but that's what I'm doing." His voice had none of the flatness from the station. There was something else in it. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a man who had been living with a decision for a long time and had stopped pretending it was the right one. Daniel asked him what that meant. Dalton told him that there were people involved in this who were not local, not small, and not patient. He said that if Daniel kept pulling at it, those people would notice, and they already had resources in place to make problems disappear. He was not speaking metaphorically. His eyes made that clear. Daniel asked him directly, "Did you know what happened to Rachel?" Dalton looked away toward the tree line at the edge of the lot. He did not answer the question. He said, "Go home, Daniel. Lock your doors. Think about your boy." Then he got back in his truck and drove away. Daniel stood in the empty parking lot until the taillights disappeared. The thing Dalton had not said felt louder than anything he had. That night, the house was broken into. Daniel and Emily had gone to pick up Ethan from a neighbor's place where the boy had been spending the afternoon. They were gone less than 40 minutes. When they came back, the side window was open, and the interior had been searched, not ransacked, not destroyed, but methodically gone through. Drawers pulled out and pushed back, closets opened. The cardboard box from the spare room was missing. Emily's bag, which she had left on the kitchen chair, had been opened, and the contents sorted through. Her laptop was still there. The encrypted drive she kept in the bag was gone. Emily stood in the kitchen and looked at where her bag had been. Her face did not change much. She said, "They knew what to take." Ethan was in the living room sitting on the couch, very still, in the way children go. Still when they understand that the adults around them are frightened. Daniel told him everything was fine. His voice was steady enough that Ethan believed him, or chose to. The boy went upstairs without being asked. When they were alone, Daniel turned to Emily and said the thing he had been carrying since she first sat down at his kitchen table. "The night she died," he said. "Did you know it was coming?" Emily's jaw tightened. She said no. Then she said something else, something she had not said before. Rachel had called her the night before the accident, not to share files, not to update the investigation. She had called because she was scared. She told Emily that someone had been following her for 3 days, that she had found something in the documents, a name she had not expected, someone local, someone with enough reach to make things difficult. She did not say who. She said she was going to be careful. She said she would call again in the morning. She did not call in the morning. Emily had spent years asking herself what she should have done differently in the hours between that call and the news that came the next day. Whether she should have driven down that night, called the police, done something other than assume Rachel knew how to take care of herself. There was no answer that made it easier. There was only the fact of it, which sat in her chest like something that had never finished falling. Daniel did not say anything for a long time after she finished. The kitchen was very quiet. Finally, he said, "Do you still feel guilty about it?" Emily looked at him directly, and the look on her face was answer enough. Then she told him there was one more thing. Before Rachel had called that night, she had sent Emily an email, a compressed file containing documents, photographs, and a partial audio recording. Emily had kept it on a separate backup drive, one she always carried on her person, rather than in her bag, precisely because she had learned not to keep everything in the same place. The drive they had taken tonight was the one in her bag. It held her working notes. What it did not hold was Rachel's original data. She pulled the backup drive from the inside pocket of her jacket, small, flat, the kind that looks like nothing, and set it on the table between them. Everything they had lost that night was already gone. But this had been on her body the entire time, and no one had thought to check there. Daniel left the drive on the table and did not touch it that night. He sent Ethan to stay with a neighbor 2 streets over, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Bowen, who had watched the boy before and never asked too many questions. He told Ethan it was just for a night or 2 while he sorted out some things at the house. Ethan packed his backpack with practiced efficiency and hugged Daniel at the door without being asked. That small thing, the arms around his waist, the trusting weight of it was almost harder to take than everything else. After the boy was gone, Daniel stood in the hallway for a while. The house felt different without him in it, smaller somehow, and more honest about what it actually was, a place where someone had once been happy and was now just getting through. He did not sleep much. He sat at the kitchen table and thought about what stopping would mean. He thought about the sedan on the street, the silence on the phone, the man in the ordinary jacket standing outside his son's school. These were not warnings meant to inform him. They were meant to remind him that Ethan existed, that there was something left that could be taken. The people behind this had been careful for years. They had closed files, removed pages, buried a woman, and called it weather. Stopping would not make him safe. It would only make him quiet. By the time gray light came through the kitchen window, Daniel had made his decision. He told Emily when she came downstairs. He said, "We keep going." Emily looked at him for a moment, then nodded once and poured herself coffee. They spent the morning going through Rachel's files. The email she had sent Emily the night before she died contained a compressed folder documents in scanned PDF format, 2 photographs of what appeared to be handwritten ledger pages, and a partial audio recording that ran for just under 4 minutes. The recording was low quality, clearly taken on a phone from across a room, but 2 voices were audible, and one of them was discussing payment schedules tied to a county infrastructure contract. The name mentioned in the recording matched one of the board members Emily had already cross-referenced with the County Planning Commission. Taken alone, each piece was suggestive, but not conclusive. Together, combined with Emily's investigative notes, the insurance anomalies she had documented before being let go, and the pattern of contract awards Rachel had mapped across nearly 3 years, it formed something that could not be explained away as coincidence or clerical error. It was a picture. It had been a picture all along. Rachel had just not lived long enough to show it to anyone. Emily contacted the journalist in Portland. His name was Greg Sauer, and he had been an investigative reporter at a regional paper for nearly 20 years. Rachel had reached out to him several weeks before she died. He had the email chain to prove it. He had been waiting, he said. He had not known what he was waiting for until now. That afternoon, Emily went out alone to pick up food and a prepaid phone from a convenience store on the far end of town. She was gone longer than she should have been. When she came back, her face was composed, but her breathing was not quite right. She said a gray pickup had followed her from the store, staying 2 cars back through 3 turns before she had taken a longer route through a residential neighborhood and lost it. She was not certain it was deliberate. She was almost certain it was deliberate. Daniel told her to pack whatever she needed to leave quickly. He said it calmly, the way he said things when the alternative was not being calm. Emily said she already had. She had been packed since the night the drive was taken. There was no more time to be careful about the order of things. Daniel called Sauer back and told him they needed to move faster than planned. Sauer said he understood. They arranged a way to transfer the files securely, and Sauer confirmed he would have everything in the hands of a federal contact within 48 hours. He said he had been sitting on Rachel's original communications for years because he had not had enough to go to print. Now he did. Before they left the house, Daniel made one stop he had not told Emily he was going to make. He drove to Dalton's house, not the station. It was a single-story place on the east side of town, with a flagpole in the yard and a truck in the driveway that had seen better decades. Daniel knocked. Dalton answered in civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and looked at Daniel the way a man looks at something he was told not to think about. Daniel did not wait to be invited in. He said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it. Not the department answer, the real one." Dalton stepped back from the door. They stood in the narrow entryway, and Daniel asked the question that had been building since the night Emily first sat down in his kitchen. Did you know what was going to happen to Rachel? Before it happened, did you know? Dalton looked at the floor. A long moment passed. Then he said, "I knew she was being watched. I didn't know what they were going to do." His voice was flat, worn through like an old cloth. By the time I understood what had happened, what they'd actually done, it was already written up as an accident. The report was already signed. I had already signed it. He stopped. Then he said, "I've been living with that." Daniel looked at him for a long time. He thought about what it would have taken to refuse to unsign something to stand in front of those people and say no. He thought about whether he would have had the courage to do it himself. He was not sure. He was not sure that uncertainty made him more forgiving of the man in front of him, but it made the anger less clean, and that was something. He said, "I'm taking everything to a federal reporter. It's already in motion. I'm not asking your permission, and I'm not asking for your help. I'm telling you because you're going to hear about it, and I didn't want you to be surprised." Dalton said nothing. His face had the look of a man who had run out of road and knew it. Daniel walked back to his truck and did not look back at the house. The story broke 11 days later. Sauer published in coordination with a federal investigation that had it turned out already been open for 8 months under a different angle. Rachel's files gave them what they had been missing, the internal documentation that connected the payments to specific contract decisions, and the audio recording that placed at least one name at the center of it, with no reasonable alternative explanation. The federal case expanded within a week of publication. Hargrove and Sons was suspended from all county contracts, pending investigation. 3 of its board members were named in the federal filing. 2 local officials, one former one still in office, were placed under investigation for their roles in the contract award process. A state infrastructure officer, the one who had been on the planning commission during Rachel's research period, resigned before charges were formally filed. Sauer's article named Rachel Carter in its second paragraph. It described her as the person who had first identified the pattern, who had spent months building a record at personal risk, and who had died before she could bring it forward. The article did not speculate about the nature of her death. It did not need to. The federal investigation would address that in its own time, in its own language. But her name was there, attached to the truth she had been trying to tell. And that was something no one could take back. Sheriff Mark Dalton submitted his resignation the same week the article ran. No charges were filed against him. The investigation focused on the financial network, and his role had been one of omission rather than direct participation. He was not arrested. He was not exonerated. He was simply gone, and the town moved forward without him, the way towns do quietly, and without much ceremony. Emily left on a Thursday morning. She had a bag and a car she had retrieved from a lot in the next county, and she stood in Daniel's driveway in the early light, looking like someone who had been in motion for so long that stillness felt temporary even now. She told him she was going back to Portland. She had a contact at a legal firm that did whistleblower work, and there were people there who had been following the federal case. She was not sure what came next, but she said it without the weight she had carried into town, and that was different from before. Daniel walked her to the car. He was not sure what to say, and he did not try to say too much. He thanked her. She shook her head slightly, as if thanks did not apply here, as if this had not been a favor, but a debt she had been carrying and had finally been able to set down. Then she said, "There's something Rachel told me. The last real conversation we had before everything. She said that if something happened to her, she hoped you would eventually find out the truth. Not because it would fix anything, but because you deserved to know who she actually was." Emily's voice stayed level. "She said you were the kind of person who would keep going once you started." She was right about that. Daniel did not say anything. He nodded once. Emily got in the car and drove away, and he stood in the driveway until the car was gone. He brought Ethan home that afternoon. The boy walked through the door and immediately went to check that his things were where he had left them, the way children do after any disruption cataloging the familiar. He found everything in order and declared this satisfactory and asked what was for dinner. Daniel made eggs and toast because it was what he had, and Ethan sat at the kitchen counter and talked about something that had happened at school involving a substitute teacher and a map that was upside down. And Daniel listened and asked the right questions and flipped the eggs at the right moment, and the kitchen was warm and ordinary and full of the kind of noise that means a house is still being lived in. At some point, without thinking about it, Daniel looked up at the wall where the family photo had always hung. Rachel standing beside him, Ethan on his shoulders, at some fair they had gone to when the boy was still small enough to carry. The photo had been there so long he had stopped seeing it, except as something to feel bad about when he looked directly at it. He looked at it now and felt something different. Not the absence, not the guilt, not the low, familiar ache of everything unfinished. He saw Rachel the way she had actually been, someone who had noticed something wrong and decided to do something about it quietly and without asking for anyone's approval, because that was who she was. He had not fully known that about her when she was alive. He knew it now. Ethan slid off the counter and brought his empty plate to the sink and said without looking up, "Is everything okay now, Dad?" Daniel said, "Yeah, I think it is." Ethan accepted this and went to find his backpack because there was homework. Daniel turned back to the stove and turned off the burner, and the kitchen was quiet for just a moment. The good kind of quiet, the kind that does not ask anything of you. And then Ethan called from the other room about a pencil, and Daniel went to find it.